There is a moment that arrives without warning. You are doing something ordinary. Washing a dish, sitting in the car, folding something on the bed, and then a song begins. It does not announce itself. It simply starts, the way things from the past always start, quietly, without permission. And for a second, you don't move. You stay exactly where you are, hands still, and something inside you shifts before you've had time to decide whether you want it to. It's not the song exactly. It's what the song carries. The melody is the same as it always was. The words haven't changed. The rhythm is identical. But what it brings with it is different from what it brought the last time you heard it. The last time, you were someone else. You were in a different room, standing in a different version of your life, and the song meant something it can no longer mean in the same way. That version of meaning is sealed now. It belongs to a time you cannot return to, only visit through sounds like this. You remember where you were the first time this song mattered. Not just when you heard it, but where you were in life, what you were hoping for, what you believed was still possible, what you were afraid of losing, and what you were certain you were about to find. Those feelings don't belong to a single memory. They belong to an entire period, a length of years that the song somehow compressed and stored. And now it's playing them back all at once, without asking whether you're ready. There is something in the quality of older music that current music rarely produces. Not because old songs are better, they aren't always, but because current music hasn't had time yet. It hasn't soaked through enough seasons of your life to carry anything back. The songs you love right now are still light. They don't have weight yet. But the songs from years ago, the ones that played while something important was happening, while something was beginning or quietly ending, those have become something more than music. They've become time itself, compressed into sound. You didn't plan to feel this way. Nobody does. You were just standing in the kitchen, or driving somewhere unremarkable, or sitting in the ordinary quiet of an evening, and then the song found you, and for a moment, you are not fully here. You are also somewhere years ago, standing in a room you've since left, feeling something you remember, but can no longer recreate. The present keeps going around you, the traffic, the hum of the refrigerator, the light in the room, but you are briefly split between now and then, and you don't immediately try to come back. That split is not painful exactly, it's more like pressure, like pressing gently on something that has healed but still holds a memory of what once hurt. You feel the outline of a person you used to be. Not in full detail, not clearly enough to describe, but enough to know they were there, and enough to notice that something between then and now has quietly changed. That outline of a person, the one who heard this song first, is not someone you can describe cleanly. Memory doesn't work that cleanly. What you have instead are fragments, the way a room smelled, the texture of a particular afternoon, a feeling in the chest that you can almost locate but not quite name. You were younger, yes, but that's not the whole thing. Youth is only part of it. The rest of it is expectation. You are still carrying the full weight of everything you believed your life was going to become. And that weight felt different then. It felt like possibility rather than pressure. The same mass, but pointing forward instead of backward. You think about who was around you during the years when this song played most. Some of those people are still in your life, some are not. A few disappeared gradually, the contact slowing over months or years until it simply stopped without a final moment. Some left more sharply. Some are still present, but different. The relationship having shifted into something quieter and more careful than it used to be. The song plays through all of them at once. It doesn't distinguish between the ones who stayed and the ones who went. It carries them all equally, the way memory does when it doesn't have to sort or explain. There were things you used to talk about that you no longer talk about, plans that felt real enough to name, places you were going to go, things you were going to do before a certain age, before certain seasons passed. You said these things out loud to people who listened and believed you because they were carrying similar things themselves. Nobody thought those words were anything other than a preview of what was coming. The future was large and obvious, and you were all moving toward it together, or so it seemed at the time. You don't grieve those plans exactly. Grief is too strong a word for what this is. It's more like a quiet acknowledgement, an awareness that you are standing somewhere other than where you imagined you'd be, and that the distance between those two places has stopped feeling temporary. For a long time, the life you had pictured was still reachable, still just a few adjustments away. Somewhere in the years between then and now, it stopped feeling reachable. The change was gradual enough that you didn't notice a specific moment of letting go. It simply became the past, the way most things do. Not through a decision, but through the slow accumulation of days that moved differently than you'd planned. The song keeps playing while you think about none of this and all of it simultaneously. That is the strange quality of music from the past. It does not require you to think clearly. It allows you to feel things that are not fully formed, impressions and textures, rather than thoughts. You are not sad, precisely. You are not nostalgic in any simple sense. You are something closer to aware that time has moved, aware that you have moved with it, aware that the person who first heard this song and the person hearing it now are connected by memory and body, but separated by everything that has happened in between. You remember, vaguely, what it felt like to not yet know how things would go. There was an openness to that feeling, not comfortable, not easy, but open. The future was unresolved and enormous. Every year felt significant in a way that is harder to locate now, when the years have started to accumulate and the days within them have begun to blur at the edges. Back then, each month felt like a chapter. Now some months feel like pages. And occasionally, a song like this arrives and briefly restores the chapter feeling. The sense that what is happening right now is important and worth noticing, before the music ends and the ordinary day continues. There is also the version of yourself that the people around you then believed you were going to become. That version existed in the minds of others as much as in your own. Parents who carried quiet predictions, friends who assumed certain paths because of what they knew about you at that particular time, teachers or older people who saw something and named it, and whose naming felt more real than it perhaps should have. Those predictions have long since stopped mattering in any practical sense, but occasionally, hearing a song from those years, you feel the ghost of them, the weight of being someone who was expected to arrive somewhere specific. And you wonder, briefly and without distress, whether the person who expected you to arrive there ever stopped expecting it, or whether they simply adjusted their understanding the way everyone eventually does. The people who adjusted their understanding you have done the same. That is the part that is easy to overlook. When a song from the past plays and softens everything into something tender, the adjusting was not only something that happened to you, it was also something you did, actively, over a long period of time. You revised what you were aiming at. You recalibrated what success was supposed to look like. You renegotiated, mostly silently and mostly with yourself, what a good life was supposed to feel like on an ordinary Wednesday. These revisions did not feel like defeat when they were happening. They felt like growing up, which is what people call it when you quietly stop insisting on things you once considered essential. What is harder to trace is when exactly you started to revise. There was no moment when you sat down and decided. There rarely is. The revisions happened in the negative space, in the gaps between what you hoped and what arrived. A year passed where a certain thing didn't happen and you adjusted. Another year, another adjustment. After enough of those, the original picture had shifted so far that comparing it to the present one would feel almost embarrassing. Not because either version was wrong, but because the distance between them is evidence of how much time has actually moved, which is always slightly more than you're prepared to accept. The song doesn't know any of this. That is what is strange about music. It remains exactly as it was. The melody holds its shape, the lyrics repeat their original meaning, the production sits in the same arrangement it always did. The song did not age with you. It stayed in its original moment, waiting. And when it finds you now, it arrives still carrying the feeling from then, not your current feeling, but the old one, preserved like something that never had to adapt. That contrast is what makes the chest feel strange. The song is unchanged, you are not. And hearing the unchanged version of something you once loved is a very specific kind of recognition. It is the recognition that you are further along than you remember deciding to be, not further than you wanted. That comparison has too many variables to resolve quickly. But further than the version of you who first heard this song could have fully imagined. That person was still imagining, still projecting forward into time. They could picture the future, but not feel it. Not the way you can feel the past right now, with texture and weight and the quiet certainty that it happened. And what you felt then, the particular quality of being that age, in that period, carrying those specific hopes, cannot be recreated any more than a season can be recreated once it has passed. You can describe it. You can approximate it through music or photographs or revisiting places, but the actual texture of it, the feeling from the inside of being that version of yourself, exists now only in memory, which is its own kind of place, not a lesser place. Memory is not a diminished form of experience, but it is a different one. You live there briefly when something like this song arrives, and then you return to the present, which is fuller than the past in ways that are harder to name because they involve everything that has since accumulated. All the knowledge, all the difficulty, all the things that changed you without your full consent. That return to the present is not a loss. It only feels like one for a moment, the way waking from a good dream feels like loss until you're fully awake and remember your actual life. The present has its own weight, its own texture, its own version of what matters, but the song has reminded you, briefly, that there was another version, that you were someone before this, that the distance between that person and this one is real and significant and worth noticing without needing to resolve it into anything tidy. Worth noticing, that is where the song leaves you if you let it. Not in grief, not in longing, but in simple noticing. The kind that doesn't ask for a conclusion. You notice that you have become someone who hears old songs and feels the gap between then and now, which means you are old enough for there to be a meaningful gap, which means enough time has actually passed. That is not a dramatic realization. It arrives quietly, the way most true things about adulthood do, not as a revelation, but as a recognition of something that was already true, something you already knew but had not recently stopped to feel. You think about identity, not in any abstract philosophical sense, but in the ordinary sense of the word, who you are, and how much of that changes, and how much stays consistent underneath the changes. The person who heard this song then was nervous about different things, cared intensely about different outcomes, measured themselves against different standards, spent energy worrying about futures that are now the past, resolved in ways that were sometimes better than feared and sometimes different than hoped. The worried versions of those old concerns don't live in you anymore. They resolved and were replaced by new ones, which will eventually resolve and be replaced in turn. What stays is harder to name. Something in the way you move through difficulty. Something in what you return to when everything else falls quiet. The version of you from back then was not simpler. You were not less complicated by virtue of being younger. You were differently complicated. The complications were particular to that period. Particular fears, particular desires, particular social geometries that felt enormous at the time and now seem, in retrospect, scaled to a version of life that has since expanded. Not that those feelings were small. They were real and full-sized when they were happening, but time creates a kind of perspective that cannot be forced or fabricated. You look back at the weight of certain things and feel the distance between how heavy they seemed then and how they register now. And you realize that this shift is just what living through time does. It doesn't make the old weight wrong. It just shows you how the scale changes. There were nights during those years when this song played and the future felt both urgent and terrifying. You remember the quality of that feeling, not its specific shape, but its texture. The sense that everything was still undecided, that your entire life was still in front of you, and the decisions you were about to make were enormous and permanent. Some of that was true. Many decisions from that period did carry real weight and shape the life that followed. But the feeling of urgency was also partially a product of youth, of being close enough to the beginning that the beginning still felt like the defining reference point. Now the reference points are more numerous. You have more past than you used to. The future is still present, still being shaped, but it is no longer the only story. Some of the things you were most afraid of during those years happened and were survivable. Some of the things you most hoped for arrived and were quieter than expected. A few of the things you expected to matter stopped mattering somewhere along the way, replaced by concerns you hadn't predicted and satisfactions you hadn't imagined. That is what a life actually does. It keeps introducing you to things you didn't know you were going to care about, and quietly retiring things you were certain would always matter. You could not have seen this from back there. Nobody can see it from back there. That is the specific blindness of being young, not stupidity, not naivety exactly, but simply the absence of enough lived time to know how dramatically the interior of a life can change while its exterior continues. The song is almost over now. You can feel it moving toward its ending, the way you always could even the first time you heard it. There is something about knowing a song well that means you carry its shape inside you. You know where it is going before it gets there. And that foreknowledge is part of what makes it yours. It became yours because you heard it enough times and in enough contexts that it absorbed into you, the way things do when we don't decide but simply live with them long enough. You did not choose to be moved by this song. You chose nothing about the way music works on memory. That is simply what years of living do to the sounds that accompanied them. You wonder briefly what the songs playing in your life right now will carry back to you years from now. What memories they are silently recording, what feelings they are storing for later retrieval. You are living inside future nostalgia right now and cannot feel it as such. The present is always too present to feel historical. But eventually, some ordinary song playing on some ordinary afternoon will fold itself into the fabric of this period and carry it forward and arrive one day in some future version of this room and play it back to whoever you are by then. That future version of you will hear it and feel the gap between then and now, the same gap you are feeling tonight, and they will not be able to explain exactly what the feeling is, only that it arrived without warning and stayed for the length of a song. That future version is not someone you can fully imagine, the same way the person back then could not fully imagine you. There is a symmetry to this that the song makes briefly visible. You looking back at an earlier self who could not see you coming, knowing that a future self is similarly invisible to you right now. Between those 3 points, past, present, future, there is a continuity that is real, but hard to feel clearly. You are the same person across all of them, and you are also different at each point, shaped by everything that arrived between. The song belongs to the past version. The person feeling it belongs to the present one, and somewhere ahead, both of them will be the past. What does it mean to notice all of this while a song plays? It means very little in any practical sense. It changes nothing about tomorrow. The workday will arrive, the obligations will continue, the ordinary rhythm of the present will reassert itself with no interest in the recognition that arrived tonight. But something in noticing still matters, even if the mattering cannot be measured. To stop for the length of a song and feel the full distance of where you've been, that is its own kind of attention. Not productive, not useful, but real. The kind of real that only comes from paying attention to the passing of time rather than simply living through it. You did not ask for this feeling tonight. The song arrived and the feeling came with it. Uninvited, but not unwelcome. That is what the best things from the past do when they find you in the present. They don't ask permission. They simply remind you that you have lived, that time has moved, and that somewhere inside all of it is a version of yourself that the current version carries forward without always knowing. And then, without warning, the carrying forward stops because the song ends. Not the way memory ends, which is gradual and uneven, but cleanly, on its own terms, with the same notes in the same order it always has. One moment the room was holding something. The next moment it is just a room again. Whatever you were doing before the song started is still there, waiting in the ordinary way that tasks wait. The dish, the folded thing on the bed, the low light in the corner that was already on when the music began. You stay in that quiet for a moment after the sound stops. Not because you are trying to hold on to anything. You cannot hold on to something like that. But because the transition from then to now requires a second to complete. The feeling doesn't vanish when the music ends. It lingers at the edges the way light lingers at the horizon after the sun goes down. You are somewhere else for a few minutes, not fully elsewhere, not absent from the room, but divided. And now you are gathering yourself back into one place, one time, the only time that is actually available to you. You think of the person who first heard this song, not with sadness, not with envy, with something quieter and less shaped than either of those, a kind of acknowledgement. They were doing the best they could. With what they had and what they knew, they could not have known what the years between then and now would carry. Nobody can know that from inside that period. They were living forward, the same as you are now, and the fact that the living looked different than they imagined is not something that diminishes what they were hoping for. It only means that life moved the way it moves, not according to plan, not against it, just according to itself. The ordinary sounds of the present reclaim the room, the refrigerator hum, the traffic outside, the building settling into the night around you. These sounds were always there. They were there while the song played. They return now to the foreground, and you are here again, not the earlier version, not whoever you'll eventually be, but this one, the current one, standing in this particular evening with the quiet understanding that you have been somewhere and come back, and that the going and returning are both part of the same life. The song will find you again. It always comes back. And when it does, you will be further still from where you are tonight. And you will feel this evening the way you now feel those earlier years, with texture and recognition, with the soft awareness that you are here, that something of it remains, and that the music, unchanged as it is, will keep carrying it forward long after you have moved on from this room.